What's going on, everyone? Tanner Poppitt here of Madrost and Poppitt's Corner. Just reminding you that our new record, Charring the Rotting Earth, is now available at NoLifeTomatoRecords.com. That's right. Just go in the search bar, type in NoLifeTomatoRecords.com, and support. Again, NoLifeTomatoRecords.com. Now, let's check out the episode you came to see. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Poppitt's Corner. Thoroughly excited, as always, to be doing these. And, of course, got the main man himself, Mr. Shannon Frye from Avenger of Blood, joining me today. Shannon, how you doing, man?
I'm good, bro. I'm good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, man. It's been a solid week so far. So looking forward to doing this with you tonight. I don't know if I've ever talked about my kind of, I wouldn't even say dealings. I would just say my kind of interactions with a TV show back in the day, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, called That Metal Show, right?
Yeah.
It was now before we get started in some of my storytellings and whatnot. I'm gonna have you give a brief synopsis for people that may not know what we're talking about here. So, if you can recall, what do you recall kind of happening with That Metal Show, and what was it?
Oh, so a brief description.
Correct.
Okay. So there were two comedians. One's name was Don Jameson. The other guy, I don't exactly remember his name offhand.
Jim Florentine.
Say again?
Jim Florentine.
Jim
was the other guy.
Florentine. Yeah. Right, from Crank Yankers. And then there was the radio host out of New Jersey, who lives here in Vegas now, half the year, named Eddie Trunk. And it was filmed in front of a studio audience, and they had a girl that would come out and flip the board. They would have different top 5 albums of this band, or top, like we kind of do on occasion, but they would have it, and they would choose of which album goes where in the ranking. As time would go on, they would have guests. They would interview the guests. Very, very short interviews. Not really a whole lot of time to talk to them. But it was interesting sometimes, the guests that they would have. And then they would have a segment called Stump the Trunk, where they would ask questions to Eddie about metal and hard rock. And the guy, as knowledgeable as he is about certain bands, he's not very knowledgeable about metal as a whole. He knows maybe, and I'm not picking him on this, picking on him about this, but to me, he knows 10 bands. And aside from that, like little bits and pieces of other things, but he's not a thrasher. He's not into death metal. He's not into doom, grind, anything that we are into. So it's more the popular stuff that was on MTV back in the 80s and early 90s. And then they would have, the comedians would also make fun of him in the show. And that was kind of interesting because they're good at ripping on each other. And then, they would also have a guest guitar player in the crowd, or a guest drummer that I've seen. I had never seen a bass player. Maybe I'm wrong. Billy Sheehan, maybe? Okay. But in a roundabout way, that was the show.
Right. And it was way before podcasts became popular, right? It was like 2011, 12 era.
Right when podcasts were coming on, right when podcasts were starting to happen. Not the video podcast, but the audio podcast.
Right. So meaning that it wasn't conveniently, it wasn't convenient that we had a show dedicated to quote unquote metal music, right? We didn't have that back then.
Right.
And we're only talking 10 years ago here. So the show was based out of out of Hollywood, California, and I think they would do some episodes in New Jersey. I think it started in New Jersey, New York area, and then they would film episodes here. Now, what they would do is, and I'll kind of pull behind the curtain. They did what 10 seasons of that thing,
Right.
and what they would do is, so they would film like 2 episodes at a time. It would be like they were like what half-hour shows and whatnot, and pretty much how I heard about becoming like a part of like the studio audience is I subscribed to the VH1 Classic was the station that would air it, and they send out an email saying, "Hey, for anyone who wants to be a part of That Metal Show, we're taping in LA. Here's all the information. Here's the time. Here are the guests for that for that specific day or whatever." And you wouldn't know the guest until like maybe the day of or the day before, whatever it is. But so we I've been to maybe like 5 seasons of it. So I went on a couple times in the studio audience, right? So it would always be like me and my dad, or me and next member of the band at the time and whatnot. So I remember one instance where they would do the shows, right? So that they would do the shows, in 1 or 2 takes or whatever, and that would be it. It was like a full production. I mean, like big old cameras, the set, the lights, everything. So I was always under the impression for the segment called Stump the Trunk that you could ask any question you wanted when it came to that segment. I quickly found out that that was not true. So we show up to one of the tapings, and I think it was Frankie Banali was the guy, and I think Glenn Hughes was with him. But I know it was Frankie Banali. And what they would do is they would pick certain people out of the audience. Hey, raise your hand if you want to ask Eddie Trunk a question. Okay, and then I would I raised my hand and I got picked, right? And I was wearing my Dark Angel T-shirt like a badass. Those guys had no idea who the fuck Dark Angel is. I'm just gonna preference that now, because I remember a different story was me and an ex-member went to That Metal Show taping, and he was wearing a Sarcophago T-shirt. None of the guys knew who it was, and they specifically pointed out to that gentleman's T-shirt and said, "Who the fuck is that?" And we looked at each other like, these guys are fucking idiots. that was the moment when I was like, oh, okay, this is like they're not educated enough to have a show like this. I would say what they're pertaining to are like the 50-year-old rockers that only remember 10 bands from MTV and VH1, or actually no, I'm preference that MTV only, because that's what was popular in the late 80s, early 90s. So
Right.
they didn't know that like that station aired other fucking types of music like Sarcophago, like Death, like Cannibal Corpse, right? They were played on MTV during the 80s and 90s. Absolutely. But those guys didn't know, nor did
Right.
they care.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? They were more interested in the bands that became quote unquote mainstream. The
Right.
Panteras, the fucking Metallicas, the Megadeths, all that kind of stuff. And then Eddie Trunk's 2 favorite bands, Rush and UFO. That was it.
And Kiss.
Anything? Yeah, and Kiss. Sorry.
So, yeah.
Whatever. Right? But that didn't pertain to me. Like, I liked those bands, but I was happening around that specific time period. And I'll get back to That Metal Show, the Stump the Trunk thing. But back in those, during those specific time periods, we had thrash metal raging at that point. I mean, what you guys were doing, that was very popular, and that show just did not do that any justice. Didn't
Mm.
do any of the bands justice when it came to like new bands and helping actually promote metal as a whole. Right? All it pertained to was like the old guys. And
Mhm.
I just thought that was very like disrespectful to the genre itself. Like here we
Right.
had this perfect opportunity that we could utilize as a whole, but they're only doing it to like mainstream fucking bands and
Right.
bands who already have made it.
Right.
Bands who don't need the exposure. And let's have
Right.
the same guest on 80 million times,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So that was a huge conundrum for me personally watching it, going, man, this is like the same old shit. And I think that's why it met
Fail.
its end. Yeah. Because it was
But
doing the same shit over and over and over and over again. And people just lost interest, even though the quote unquote Eddie Trunk says he's asked every day about that metal show, which I call bullshit.
mhm.
Total bullshit on. And even if that was the case, you could still do it now. You could bring back that metal show. If you want
Yeah.
the full production value, that ain't happening. We have
Right.
podcasts now, so that show
Right.
is completely irrelevant when it comes to like, big production. You could do it. You could do that metal show still.
Right. But
You know,
then they should do that metal show. You know what I mean? Not that metal and rock show, because that's what they made it out to be. When you have bands like Creed, that ain't metal. When you have Rage Against the Machine, sorry, that ain't metal either.
well,
When you have
here's the thing
um,
that I have a problem with. Then I'm gonna
UFO is not metal. You know what I mean? Like some of those bands he had on there were not metal bands, and it was called That Metal Show. That always like just another jab at reason to not like it, even though I did like it, but it was a reason to not like it. So which is pertaining to why it helped fail,
well,
in my
I like
opinion.
right, and here's the thing. That's the only thing we had at the time.
Mm.
Like I didn't know this other outlet was gonna be so popular, and meaning like the podcasting realm was going to be so popular, and so we were able to create our own kind of versions of that show to help actually promote metal as a whole. And I think, you know here's what I had a problem with on that show. They would always claim all things hard rock and heavy metal. Well, what's part of heavy metal? Thrash, death metal, black metal. You could say grindcore. I would
Mm-hmm.
say so.
Mm-hmm.
That was never represented. And they
Black
even
metal.
addressed it. Well, they even addressed it, saying we're only the thing is MTV did not play those videos back in the day, which again is another bullshit excuse because they did.
Mm-hmm.
They had a thing called Headbangers Ball, where they
Right.
literally played the heaviest music that they could at that time, and a lot of it was thrash and death metal bands.
During the three-way thrash.
Right. And you couldn't bring on nuclear
But
assault or something like that, like to bring it back, like the monotony, to kind of clear up the monotony of having the same big four fucking style bands of thrash metal. You couldn't break up the monotony any other way.
right. Right.
So it's all like who were they really pertaining to? Who was this show, meant to be watched by? Well, it's meant to be watched
Oh,
by the 50-year-old guys again that like the same 10 bands who
mm-hmm.
don't ever want to change. And again, that's probably why it failed, because there's no room for it to grow and support the new kind of bands coming up, because that's I think the biggest downfall for that show. That it's like what could have been.
Mm-hmm. What could have been? Very huge question too. Pertaining to that show, it could have been. It could have been.
And
But then again, it was on VH1. They were also told what they had to say. They were told what to cover. It wasn't them that was choosing that. That was VH1 that was choosing that. And and that's been confirmed by Jim Florentine and Eddie Trunk as well.
right, and again, I'm not putting it past that
Right.
show because of
It's
that reason. I'm just saying
it's
that like using that as an excuse is bullshit,
hmm
because they used to air those videos back in the day.
right.
You
But
know,
VH1 is also partially to blame for that. I just want to put that in.
well, right, but even on their own programming, I specifically remember watching, an anomaly video, meaning like I think I would watch a Cannibal Corpse kind of video on
Metal
VH1,
Mania.
yeah, on like Metal Mania, or so they would have it, like it was
Hmm.
clearly there. So Again, I think they were just using that as like an excuse to not do that, right? Because you have classic death metal bands, just like classic thrash bands, and I think it's because like they didn't want to do it. I think
Right.
the host generally just didn't want to do that. And again, that's when I kind of lost interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you're going to claim all things hard rock and heavy metal, do it.
But don't call it that metal
But
show.
don't call it that metal show and only do the same fucking 10 bands, right? So, okay.
Right.
So let's get back to a gripe
Asking
I
the
have.
question.
Yeah, a
Asking
gripe.
the question on the show.
Right. So on the episode with Frankie Banali, uh, I I got picked from the audience, right? Reverting back to this. So get picked from the audience. I go, step down from the audience or whatever into like another area where like there's like 8 or 9 people, and they don't air every single question asked, by the way. So a lot of times they pick and choose what questions are going to be asked. You sign a waiver saying, hey, you might be chosen, and you sign away like the likeness or whatever it is that you do just to be on TV. You got to sign a waiver to do that. So I was under the impression like, yeah, like cool. So even before this happened, there was a place where you could write down your question and submit it into like a box before the show happened, right? So when I get down to this fucking area, they hand me a card, and it's like the worst question of all time. It literally is like the most generic bullshit. Like, and I knew I was going to get on TV because of it, because it's like the most softball fucking question. It was, who originally wrote and recorded "Come On, Feel the Noise"?
Oh, Slade. Yeah, that's too easy.
Right?
Did he
I
get
like so
around?
I fuck no. No, so again, I knew I wasn't going to get a prize or whatever, which beside the point. But it's just like wait, so I don't even get to ask my own question. I have to ask a question that the studio gave me, or it's somebody else's question. Do you know what I mean? Like that seems kind of weird. But
Yeah.
if again, claiming that Eddie Trunk knows all, I firmly believe that he knew the answers before the questions happened. Now that I've like kind of pulled it back a little bit and known that they gave it to me ahead of time, right? Doesn't that seem kind of weird to you?
It's very strange. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I specifically remember too on one occasion when we were in the audience, a lady in front of us, some other lady asked her question, and after the taping was over, that segment was over. She fucking like threw like a not a rage fit or whatever, but like she was like, "Hey, like that's bullshit. That was my question," and she got a prize off the air. They gave her a
Wow.
prize because do you know what I mean? They gave her a
Yeah.
prize off the because he got it wrong or whatever like that. So I thought that was kind of a little strange, but again, this is all like behind the curtain. Kind of, I'm pulling the curtain back a little bit here. But I thought it was more than meets the eye, and it just wasn't for me personally. Like that show could have been so like beneficial to new bands because we had Warbringer kicking ass then. We had
Hmm.
like uh uh I mean even like a black again, you don't have to like them, but like a Black Dollar Murder was kicking ass then. Bands of that
Hmm.
ilk could have benefited hugely from like a that metal show because we didn't have anything else on regular cable. Now all of
Hmm.
it's changed. I don't think like you could have a that metal show like that anymore, which maybe that's good for good and bad reasons. Maybe it's better that it's not there because we have
Hmm.
all this other kind of alternate platforms. So yeah,
Right.
it was just really like a strange environment. And so after the show aired and whatnot, and it was a good time. It was just there was just a strange, I don't know, a strange thing surrounding it. I would say, but the show would end. You get to meet the guests after the show, shake hands with all the hosts, and blah 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 blah. Right? Like I got to meet Glenn Hughes and Bill Ward and Glenn Danzig and Dave Medichetti, Frankie
Wow.
Banali. Right? I got to meet all of them. They're super nice. So that was kind of a cool thing outside of just going and sitting in for free in the audience.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
that is
so
awesome.
so yeah, I don't think I've ever told my That Metal Show experience, but it was
Did they have a
they would.
guest guitarist at that time?
Yeah, so there's one time I sat next to Billy Sheehan when he was doing his fucking raging bass. Oh, it ruled.
Oh wow.
I didn't ever go there when there was a drummer. Like I went there when Richie Coxon was playing, and he fucking didn't have a pick,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
he asked me for a pick or whatever, and I didn't have one at the time. Like I was like, oh fuck, I forgot to bring my drop picks. But
Damn.
because he looked at me knowing that I was like a guitar player and whatnot. So, but he was really cool. He was really nice, and I think he got a pick. So, and that's the end of that story. But it's like a what could have been. I was expecting way more than what I saw.
Uh
But
huh.
again, it's like, what can you do? The only thing you can do is do your own version of it. But I don't think it could be done nowadays because it'd be too expensive. And you don't need to have big old camera crews and fucking wardrobes, and you don't need any of it anymore. You can literally just do it out of your garage
Right, right. Well, look at out of, out
between
of
two ferns.
Canada, out
It's
of Canada, the Banger TV uh, crew, I guess you could call them. Like they're doing it basically what that metal show was, except all of it, all of it, and more. I mean, good for them. Good for them for taking it on. That's ballsy. But
right, and it's
yeah, I
like,
don't think that metal show, just a hour long, half an hour long metal show, could last today. Like you're saying, I don't think it could either.
I just I don't think that it would. It's just it reaches a point when it's just not fun to watch anymore because it's the same old shit. Like it's
Right,
not new and exciting.
right,
It was only
right,
like that for until a certain point.
right.
So
The first three seasons, and then after it just kind of felt like it was repeating itself over and over and over. I
right,
guess you,
same
yeah.
guests, and that's why they kind of
Hmm.
had to expand it to segments and not
Hmm.
have like you know guests of again because the up and comers could have benefited, I think, the most from this, not the fucking guys that don't need the exposure.
Hmm. Right.
They're already covered.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it could have helped us out. Could have helped you out. Warbringer, Ex Mortis, Dark Funeral, shit, Cannibal Corpse, even though they were already big. All
Again,
those bands, Heathen, Hell Heretic, Hellstar, all of there's so much that they didn't cover because they were too focused on the old days. They were too focused on, sure, it's great to have Black Sabbath on. Who wouldn't? Hell. But come on, Creed, come on, Slash, come on.
dude,
It's
the
just
great
people
guest,
fucking.
I think the most metal guest they ever got on, and it's arguably up for debate, but to me, when they got King Diamond on, that was the most metal guest you could possibly get on that show. Other than that, it was like that's when it felt like, okay, cool, he's doing something different. Meaning Jim, Don, and Eddie, but I just don't think they're very knowledgeable metal wise as a
They're
whole. I
not.
just thought they were like they knew some stuff, which is cool. And Jim Florentine plays a lot of killer like B-side stuff that you would never hear elsewhere. But again,
Hmm.
same bands. It's not like anything different than what Eddie Trunk does or whatever. He just plays more of the B-sides.
Right.
But
I
I can
think Don
appreciate.
Jameson could have opened up a little more too, but he kind of stayed. They both kind of Don and
And Jim and Eddie.
yes, Don and Jim could have expanded outside because they could have just let Eddie have his own persona, which is those 10 bands and repeating the old days. But Don and Jim, they know more of the newer stuff. And I don't mean Slipknot because they come on stage in Slipknot shirts or whatever. But I mean they could have branched out and brought our bands in, or the black metal and the death metal, even though they may not be totally into it, they're kind of into it, just not as big as
Well,
much as some of us are. You know what I mean? They could have branched out and said, "Hey," when they would hold up, for example, they would hold up towards the end, the last 5 seasons, I would say, they started holding up albums that they got. Who knows if it was from the label or if they were supposed to promote those on the show, but the way that it seemed is they picked those albums to show on camera, not VH1 Classic said that this is what you have to show. So when they were showing, look, I got the new Anthrax, look, I got the new whatever, like they could have opened that up, and I think it would have. That's when it would have really helped the lesser known bands such as us and Warbringer and you guys and whoever, you know.
sure. But another thing about that show is it was taped well in advance. So like by the time it aired, it was already like kind of old news.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean?
Right. But old news is still news. You know what I mean?
True.
When it comes to us lesser known bands, that's anything is good.
But dude, when you're picking like the top like 5 greatest like thrash albums, and you're all of them are like the big
Of,
four,
of
like
course.
really, you know,
Yeah, but
there
who
are other
else are they
bands
going
that
to choose? They don't know anything else.
I mean, there are other bands outside of the big four that exist in thrash metal, right? Like Dark Angel exists, right?
Violence. Right. Sodom.
Death
Creator
Angel.
violence.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's not
so
just like
many.
the big four and Exodus and Overkill and
Mm-hmm.
Testament. That's like all they would list. So
Mm-hmm.
those are my gripes about it. It was what it was during a time when I guess we needed to have something, but all in all, I'm glad we have what we have now, so we can keep promoting the new style bands. But just wanted to do it like a short little run here today and just tell some stories about a little show that again, I guess we're still talking about it, so it left some sort of impact with us. But
Right. Good and bad
so
impressions both.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not trying to knock it all. There's
I
some
know.
great aspects for it, but it is what it is.
Right.
So,
Right.
but yeah, for another episode of Poppitt's Corner, guys, we're out of here. Cheers.